Real people, real stories, and real challenges that break the status quo. I'm your host, Jivila, and welcome to Perception Paradox. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Perception Paradox. And as you can see, we have changed a bit of the format, that it became a weekly dive into the knowledge, stories, and inspiration. And we're also introducing new chapters and new angles into the stories. So it's not only about the Underdog founders, it's also about the different business cases, also about different philosophies and topics focused on health. So today we're having with me in the episode Flo, who will be sharing with us actually about the landscape outside Europe in Africa. And we met with Flo back in December in Rwanda when we were part of a program called Unleash. And immediately out of everyone, you could recognize him being super energetic, super talkative, always surrounded by people, always having different ideas. So we kept in touch after the program in Rwanda. In one of our conversations, I thought, why not to bring different perspective in general on other regions, so we could kind of learn in Europe as well from each other. Without saying no more, I would like to welcome Flo on stage. Hello, Flo. How are you today?
Hey, doing well, thanks. Thank you, Zivile. Always great to talk to you.
All right. Where are you tuning in today from?
So I am in Nairobi right now. That's where I'm based. Quite sunny outside. Really beautiful day outside. So
Is it ever cold there?
it's
I've
like
never
20
been to the.
degrees. Cold is
Oh
like
my
20
God.
degrees. It's really
Okay,
it's
cool.
a warm place to be in.
Okay, that's great. So, what brings you to Nairobi, and what's your story actually? Because you're not from there, right?
I'm not from Nairobi, but I guess Nairobi has kind of become my home, my second home, I'll say. Yeah, I'm originally from Burundi. That's where I was born, and that's where I grew up. Stayed most of my life there, and then ended up coming to Nairobi a couple of years ago for school and also for job opportunities, and have been here for the longest time, I'll say.
Okay, that's cool. So,
Mm.
what brought you to entrepreneurship on the first side? Because I saw also like on your LinkedIn and CD, you have different experiences. A lot of them were always kind of involved with some kind of money flow in a way, if I understood that correctly. But maybe you can tell us more like, why are we having this conversation now about the startups?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I kind of stumbled into entrepreneurship and investments in general. I growing up in Burundi, I would say most people are very much encouraged to follow a typical career. You want to get good grades and you want to get into a good job. My father is a lecturer, a math lecturer, so it's very much always encouraging me to do something around math, and I didn't mind really. I really like math. But I think math was like the third thing I liked the most. I like football and music,
You
and
liked football
math
and
was
music, okay? What kind of
yeah
music?
growing up. Oh, that's a good question. Mostly African music, so Burundian music. Like I grew up listening to
Ooh.
a lot of Burundian music. He really encouraged me to do something with mathematical in it, and I didn't mind really because I really like mathematics. So yeah, I came here to Kenya to study a course which is called Actuarial Science. It's a bit of statistics, a bit of investments, a bit of insurance, and I really liked it. And instead of taking the typical career going into the actuarial space, which is mostly around insurance, I thought that there would be good application around that, right? Because you have a lot of math skills and a lot of statistic skills, it might make sense to apply them to other areas. And I was really young. I didn't know really what I wanted to pursue in life. I wanted to explore what's out there, just try to do things left and right. And because I wanted to do something to do with either Kenya and also Burundi, also traveled the continent.
Hmm.
That brought me to consulting, management consulting. And I think that's where I started. So working with entrepreneurs very closely, seeing some of the challenges they face, and trying to support them in one way or another. And that was very much interesting. The good thing about entrepreneurship, you find a problem, you stumble to a problem, and you find, you build something from the ground and actually, help solve
Hmm.
a challenge that is actually increasing. And challenges are many on the continent. So yeah, kind of how I stumbled into entrepreneurship and the investment.
Okay. Before we dive deeper into that, how did you end up at bestseller and how is it with the whole ecosystem in Africa?
Mhm.
What made you being so brave and courageous, not following the traditional path? Growing up in the
Ah,
society where everyone is following some kind of set of rules, myself coming from Lithuania, recently a young country, and it was very
mhm.
clear that kind of you have to study, you have to get a job, and so on. And being this the sheep, the outlier, sometimes would require some kind of courage because you really had to have your strong why. Why am I
Mhm.
doing the ways different? What if something fails? How was that in your case? Did you have some family support, like just pursue what you want to do, or you just believed in yourself, or I don't know?
That's a good question. Just it brings me back to my younger days. I remember when I was talking to my mom when I was really young, and she said that she had to go through really hard times when she was really young. I don't want to get into that, but she really had to go through a hard time, and she said that her job, how she sees her job as a mother, is really helping me, do not go through some of the challenges she went through, and that always gave me confidence. And she always told me, if I manage to do it, you're going to do it, right? And she always encouraged me to do things I wanted. I remember even when I was still young, I wanted to join a football academy. She really pushed me. I ended up not going that way, but she really supported me through the whole way. And I think it has always been around me, right? And it's actually even more visible with my siblings. I feel like I'm kind of conservative even compared to my siblings, but my parents had really a key role to play in me just becoming who I am and going into non-conventional ways. That's one area. And I will say another thing is that most of the time in Africa, you have to really find your way outside the typical path. There are very few opportunities for everyone. So most of the time people end up doing things around the main areas, and that's not by choice. But I'm happy to say that I made it. I made it by choice. It was my choice to go into the non-typical way.
Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Wow. So then you chose, okay, math will be your way to go. In a way, kind of makes sense, still the career and so on. Is music still a part of your life?
It is part of my life, especially when I'm disturbing my girlfriend with it. I listen to a lot of music, and I don't know if you remember from Rwanda. I also try to exercise a lot, so music is always key part
Yeah.
of my life. A funny fact about me: I always save random music. Like if I hear like classical music or like old music, I save it and I say when I become an artist, I'm going to sample it. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I have like a collection of
I can't wait.
interesting. And then one day I'll be like, you know what? Let me do this music thing.
Awesome. When we can do a party someone in the remote desert or forest in Africa. That's amazing. I wouldn't say no.
Mhm. There you
Or
go.
you can
Yeah.
come to Europe, to Lithuania or some other Spain or any place, then to
Mhm.
play the music. That's great. I like this plan. So I wish it works out for you and you keep having that drive. But going back then to the topic, startups, founders, what inspired you to work for a venture capital firm actually in Africa? Because you're working right now for Bestseller, right?
Yes. Yes.
What led you there? Did they find you? Did you find them? Was it a mutual match?
Yeah, we found each other, I would say. Started mostly from consulting. I was working with a local firm, management consultant that was helping businesses with different areas, mostly capital raise, but also internal structures, just to help them with their growth strategy. So you
Hmm.
find that most entrepreneurs on the continent, they are typical entrepreneurs who never actually had any form of training, right? Not from school, not from a mentor, someone who's just self-made, someone who came up with an idea and just pursue it, regardless of all the challenges, right? So sometimes you need that structure, someone just to help them guide and help them with the bureaucracy that can come around working with financial institutions. So that was what I was basically doing, just bridging the gap between the entrepreneurs and the investors. And I did that for some time. I really enjoyed it, especially working
Hmm.
with entrepreneurs. And I felt like there's a huge opportunity here. There's a huge opportunity to work with investments and to bring more capital on the continent. There are so many innovative ideas. We have a young population in Kenya, actually in Africa in general. And for us to provide employment, to provide opportunities for these young people, we'll have to be very much innovative and come up with new ways, right? And I thought
Mm-hmm.
investments would be the right place to go to. So I didn't join venture capital directly. I joined a debt financing fund, which was focusing on
Mm-hmm.
East Africa, and that was really fun. Another fun part of my work. We're mostly working more established businesses who are hoping to grow. So what you find most of the time is that most businesses reach a ceiling, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
every single piece of profit that you make, you invest in the business, but you don't manage actually to make huge savings that can go into affording maybe a huge piece of equipment that could actually help you to grow 3, 4 times what you're doing, right, at the time, right? And that's where we came in, right? We provided capital, helping these businesses to grow exponentially in the next couple of years, but also expertise, right? Bringing expertise from more the developed world. People who have actually seen this and how growth companies can look like. So yeah, that's what I was doing. But again, going back to the topic of entrepreneurship, I felt like the early stage in Africa is quite underserved. There are very few funds focusing on that part, which is understandable because it's quite risky. And that's one area. And the second thing was that there is, as I said, young, very, very a huge population. I think in the next couple of years, Africa will have 90% of the population increase
Ninety
in the whole
percent.
world. Yeah.
90.
So
That's a huge
Nigeria,
number.
right? Yeah, so
Yeah.
most people are going to be here on the continent growing. So we need to find ways to provide employment for them. We need to find ways for them to find, opportunities. And early
Mm-hmm.
stage, the innovative space will be the right place to go. So I started looking into venture capital. And then one thing I also realized is that most of the time when you're working in an environment like Africa, you need more patient type of investor. You need patient capital. This is the first time we are dealing with venture capital. This is the first time we're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with institutional investments. So we need someone who's willing to stay longer than that 10-year period that you usually see
Mm-hmm.
with typical venture capital funds. And I thought a family office would be the right place to be in, right? So started looking around one of the places I was looking to get someone, and we closely matched our ideas and our beliefs in the continent, and ended up joining a couple months ago.
Okay. Couple months ago.
Yeah, still quite new. Six months
Yeah.
ago.
Okay. I mean, it's not couple months. Couple months, 6 months. I think you're quite already. For me, it feels like you're quite established there already. So the youth in Africa. So when we are talking about youth, what kind of age range are we referring to?
I would say anyone below 35. I
Below
still consider
35.
my
So 90.
uh,
Ah,
I still
that's
consider
good.
myself a young person.
Yes, of
Anyone
course.
below 35.
Okay.
So I would say it's part of the youth. Yeah.
And what are the major markets right now in Africa when it comes to the startups? Like, okay, so it's Kenya, right? I saw in Rwanda many things are happening and everything is like thriving in a way and it looks promising. Anything else?
Yes, there are basically four main hubs of the entrepreneurial scene in Africa, and that's mostly
Yeah.
Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt, right? Quite well distributed across the continent, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other hubs that are coming up, very interesting ones.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of activities in Rwanda. The Rwandan government has really put in place good regulation to encourage entrepreneurship and investment in the space. In the West African side, you see countries like Benin, countries like Senegal, which are very
Mm-hmm.
much on the front of entrepreneurship and investment at the time, right? But I would say the big four, what we usually call the big four, is Nigeria, Kenya in the east, South Africa in the south, and Egypt in the north.
Okay. And I've seen quite a lot of different accelerators, funds coming from the Europe, from the US. Everyone is looking now in Africa. It's kind of becoming this hotspot. So how
Mhm.
does the landscape look right now with the local? Are there like some kind of key leading local funds, or it's all driven by international force, or it's a mix?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say the African market is quite ripe for international investment. There's a huge opportunity here. It's quite an untapped market in most countries, and we are seeing a lot of international players that are coming on the continent. Right now, how it started. Initially, we had a lot of the traditional bank and institutional financing happening.
Hmm.
But with entrepreneurship, banks might not always be the right place to look at. So we're seeing a lot of international players, especially in the venture capital space, coming in Africa. Initially, in the first, I would say, stage of investment was mostly Western type of investors that were more established. But there is a really high push to have more local entrepreneurs, more local investors driving innovation on the continent. It's taking a bit of time and it can be frustrating for most people, but I would say it's a bit of a mix, I would say. And yeah, hopefully we see more encouraging results in the future.
Okay, and how do you see the dynamics between the local and the funded startups and the ones that were funded by the expatriates in Africa?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing I'll say, first of all, Africa is quite diverse, 54 countries, and all of these are very unique in their own ways, which is good to
Hmm.
see in terms of culture, in terms of way doing business. So I wouldn't say there is one typical way of doing business in Africa. It's no depends on the context you are in. And initially, I think this is an area where most investors kind of struggled to understand, right? To understand that one, what was learned in the West might not always apply on the continent. And if it also
Hmm.
applies, it might not apply in another country on the continent, right? So that really affected the market initially. But I will say the more you have, first of all, investors who are more established on the continent and have an understanding of the countries they are in, that brings more context to the investment space. Secondly, the more you have more local team members joining the investment space, I will say it helps also to guide the right decisions. Initially, we didn't have much talent who had good and great experience in the investment space. So we had a lot of Africans who are established in the Western world come back and help to set this up. So that was very helpful. But I will say there
Hmm.
is now a strong pool of talent on the continent that investors can actually tap into. So yeah, there has been challenges, especially around culture issues. The African market is still very much, I would say, non-digital. So some of the solutions that you most of the time see around uh, tech might not always be easily adaptable to the local
Hmm.
context. So people had to find a way around that. Secondly, you see a lot of cultural differences in terms of how to do business. It's a very relational type of environment where people trust each other. I think business is always
So
relational,
first
but
you
I
have to
think here,
build a connection, right? You have to first understand and build the connection, then you talk business kind of.
exactly. So you have to
Okay,
build that personal relationship here more than anywhere else, I would say.
interesting. And I have a couple of questions out of this. So one of them is more about you mentioned about some challenges of different way of establishing funds and businesses. So a bit of a
Mm.
kind of regulatory environment. How challenging it is for external funds or accelerators to come into the region, or it depends on where are you trying to establish yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Every time I talk to entrepreneurs and investors, um, one thing they always tell me is, Flo, when I'm here, I'm not just fighting against the market and to conquer the market, not just competitors, but I'm also trying to fight with the local systems and the local regulation,
Hmm.
right? There is so many challenges, especially around regulation, that need to be addressed. The government in most countries are starting to see the value of entrepreneurship and are trying to put into place the right structures. But there's still a lot that is missing, especially around the minimal infrastructure, right? Things to do with roads, things to do with education, things to do with accessibility, internet is always a huge challenge on the continent, and that really stops entrepreneurs. So you find that even bureaucracy can actually be an issue, right? In some countries, you can wait up to 6 months to actually register a business. This is not even doing the business. This is just you going to the government and say, "Hey, can I register this business?" And it takes a couple of months just for you to register that,
Mm.
right? You can imagine how hard that
Oh
can
my
be.
god.
for the
Yeah.
entrepreneur. Yeah, so that can be challenging. But the government, I would say, has really been pushing in most African countries to drive innovation through regulation. So ensuring that the regulation in place can support entrepreneurs. But we still a really long way before that happens. Before we have a very conducive environment for entrepreneurs.
Do you think the so do you think ever it's gonna happen that I don't know, does government support startups and founders? Or do we see it more like kind of as a regular business and try to stop their growth?
So I think what the government has realized is that it cannot cover everything, especially when you
Mm-hmm.
look back at the history of Africa. We went through different phases, and especially around the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, government tried to provide solution to all the challenges, and they realize, hey, this is not something that is possible, right? The private sector has to have a key role in ensuring that
Yeah.
we grow as a continent. So they have realized that, and the good thing is that now they're putting into place. So yeah, they don't see entrepreneurs as a competitor, but they see entrepreneurs as a potential solution. But the another key context around Africa is that governments really want to feel in control of activities happening,
Mm,
not just in the business space. So you find that even for areas that are still new, where in other countries the government will let entrepreneurs play around and figure out the best way to do things, you still find the government coming in quite early and ensuring that there is tight regulation, which is not always great, right? Because you want entrepreneurs to try
yeah.
things, see what works. Um, as I always say, entrepreneurs thrive in an environment where they have freedom, right? They have freedom, they have liberty
Mm,
to explore. And you see that most African governments want to really understand everything. And because of that need to truly grasp where innovation is going, sometimes it can lead to tighter regulation, especially at an early stage. We are seeing it in a couple of areas right where, yeah, but different players are trying to lobby the government and advise them on the right structures to use.
You mentioned a bit of the startups and founders in Africa, like it's still a lot of non-digital solutions, a lot of kind of go-to problem-solving solutions that just makes life easier. What do you think sets successful African startups apart from those that struggle to gain traction?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I was thinking about it before the podcast, and I think just like as another entrepreneur around the world, one key area has to be really about resilience, right? Um,
Mm,
as an entrepreneur, you're going to go through so much, um, especially on the continent. Just trying to build up something that is sustainable. So you have to be quite resilient in order to save that. In addition to it, I will say that there is need to be some form of contrary thinking. Entrepreneurship most of the time is not well seen on the continent. I have a couple of friends who started businesses and ended up going away from the typical path as we were talking about initially on the podcast here,
mm,
and they're not well seen really. So I remember, just to give an example, I remember a friend of mine when he was still in campus, he decided to stop close to finishing and start a really good idea, but everyone was really against it. It was like, hey, that's not what we should be doing. You have good grades, you have what it takes for you to succeed. Focus on your studies, focus on having a typical career. So you need to have that contrarian thinking to make it here. So that's one area. And then another area, as I said, this is quite a relational type of environment, especially in the space where there is not much connectivity in most areas. So you need to
mm,
ensure that your network is quite strong, right? Ensure that you talk to the right people, you open up doors for your business. So being quite good on your network is going to be really really key. And then lastly, you need to understand that whatever you are building is going to be only sustainable if it fits the local context. And I think that's an area we really struggled with the entrepreneurial space early in our journey, because most solutions that you're trying to see will copy paste from the West and from markets that have worked, right?
mm,
Or I see an app that is doing something cool in the US. Let me come and try the same here, and that's not
mm.
going to work, right? I think people are starting to have some of the innovative ideas around that, right? Try to find solutions, and the typical example people usually give is about M-Pesa, which is the mobile money here in Kenya. And you can
Mm-hmm.
literally send money using an analog phone, right? You don't need to have a
Mm-hmm.
smartphone. You can literally just send money to someone else across the country without, very sophisticated tech. And that's really amazing because it had really opened up a lot of opportunities in Kenya. A lot of businesses are built around such technology. So yeah, so you need that kind of understanding the local context and providing a solution that is that
Mm,
is suited.
yeah. What are the current leading industries or verticals in the startup scene? Because this one I hear
Okay.
it's a fintech, right? Some kind of
Mhm.
looks like a fintech solution for people to make it easier to do transactions. Any
Mhm.
other kind of, is it like fintech dominant right now, or what are the kind of major problem areas that founders are focusing on?
Yeah, that's a good question. How I try to think about it, maybe to give some context, is around population, right? We
Mm-hmm.
are going to grow quite fast in the next couple of years, so you need to think through it in that lens, right? And that's how fintech comes in, right? With the middle income population going to grow, more people will have more purchasing power, and they need solution that can be um, adequate for them, right? And because banks are not able to fill that gap, a lot of fintech solutions are usually around that area, providing solutions to the middle income areas. So that's one area. Second thing, we need to improve our energy sources, right? Um, Most areas in Africa are still not connected to the traditional grid. So we need to improve our energy sources, and we are seeing a lot of happening around sustainable ways of having energy, if it's just solar or other ways. We see a lot in the energy space. And then lastly, it's about food. All- Everyone has to eat, and it's going to be a key
Mm-hmm.
area to look at. There is a lot of food waste that already happens, first of all, on the continent. Just in Kenya,
Mm.
40% of the whole production of food is
Because
actually
nobody
wasted.
buys it, or it goes bad, or why it's such a huge number of food waste?
It's around lack of proper systems, right? So you find like a farmer who
Distribution?
harvests distribution
Yeah.
one. So if I harvest today and I don't have someone to uptake it, not that someone does not need it, but someone is not there to take production, and by the time you come,
Okay.
it's already wasted, right? So that type of
Okay.
inefficiencies in the sectors. Yeah, so I'll
So
say
this the
those
whole
three
supply
areas.
chain is inefficient. The whole chain of
Exactly.
okay. Yeah.
So we need to build
Interesting.
the basics, I would say, right? So things around food,
Of course.
energy are going to be very key. Yeah. So those areas are still very important.
Mm. Okay. So these are the really major problems to solve, and I'm always curious about to ask people I'm talking, especially outside Europe. Like in
Mhm.
Europe, we have now really huge focus for the last few years on the ecosystems, right? A lot of
Mhm.
ecosystem builders, managers were appearing, and everyone is trying to build those different networks based on verticals, based on countries, regions, etc. How does it look in the African scene? Do you have some kind of like startup ecosystem that operates across the whole continent, or everyone just still operates very much country by country for now, and maybe some regions collaborate and makes it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I would say it's still very early stage, but we are starting to see some of that, right?
Uh-huh.
Traditionally, if you look at how ecosystems are built, there has to be like a key central place. And if you look, for instance, in the US, universities have been really key in building a strong ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Look at Stanford. Look at how look at many entrepreneurs came from that kind of circle. Uh, and I think that's one area that we are really struggling in. Universities haven't been really encouraging entrepreneurship. We're starting to see it. There are hubs. The three main universities, public, one public and two private, have hubs about entrepreneurship. And you see a lot of innovation coming around those areas, right? And that's one key area. And then another area that is very interesting to look at is from the angel investing space. So there's, I'll say, people have some form of liquidity and want to invest. So this creates already they have the supply, so it creates some form of demand, right? So you see a bit of
Mm.
that happening, but it's still very very minimal on the continent of scale and growth that we need in the future years. Still very minimal. And traditionally, we haven't seen a lot of incubators and accelerators, but there is a boom around that. We're seeing a lot of incubators coming on the continent, a lot of venture studios happening. But I would say it's country by country right now. We are seeing
Mm-hmm.
some where we have like a multi-country type of network, especially in the western side, the francophone side, because francophone the west where people speak French, it's really easy to move around. Countries like Senegal, Ivory Coast, Mali, it's really easy to move around, have some currencies, speak the
Mm-hmm.
same language, regulation is a bit similar, so that kind of helps. Same for the north. So you have countries like Morocco,
Mm.
Egypt, Tunisia, right?
I'm
Same
not too far
language,
now
same culture.
from Morocco. Don't worry, it's okay.
You should actually should if you have time.
I'm
Morocco
literally
and
across it.
Tunisia.
I'm literally across Africa right now when we're recording this.
You should cross. Morocco is a
Amazing.
very interesting space to look at.
Yeah, I've been
Yeah,
there only for the surf, but maybe I should look into from the different angle. Maybe I should just take
yeah.
the ferry from Tarifa and say, "Hey guys, I'm coming here to explore." All right.
There you go.
Well,
Yeah.
you mentioned incubators and accelerators. So, who are bringing those? Are they coming from the West or also locally initiated by entrepreneurs and investors?
It's a mix, obviously, but mostly from the West. There's a lot of incubators coming here. Like YC,
Uh
Y
huh.
Combinator has established a
Oh
presence
yeah,
here, so
clearly.
which is always encouraging to see. And a lot of diaspora Africans coming back to the continent have really helped to drive that. And you're seeing
Oh, that's cool.
a lot of entrepreneurs here, seeing the
Yeah.
need. For instance, some of the entrepreneurs who tried it and either worked and exited or it didn't work and ended up leaving it, see the need to actually have some form of coaching, some form of
Hmm.
support, and end up starting it locally. So yeah, it's a mix.
Yeah. How do you see that? Like, okay, so we had the West coming to a new like region and bringing the knowledge, but then again, already mentioned before in this in our conversation, you mentioned about this kind of cultural challenges, different way of looking at things, and so on. How do you see we can foster this kind of more a better maybe knowledge exchange rather than someone bringing the solution that not necessarily is adaptable in the market the way someone from outside wants to do it? Because I see it everywhere, like in Asia as well,
Mm-hmm.
when I was in Singapore and in Vietnam, exploring what's happening there. And a lot of many times people outside the area, the region, tries to bring some kind of solutions that without having the really good context, which I think is great when we merge the knowledge. So how do you see we could improve the collaboration for knowledge exchange and then bringing the technology that and sorting it to really just for the market? What would you see, like what can be done?
It's a perception paradox, I would say.
It is, right?
Yeah, I would say you should think about it. How I look at investment, as I said, first of all, you have to trust the other person, right? You need to trust someone someone who has experienced the same kind of condition as you. And what we have seen initially is, someone coming from the West with some form of capital and working with an entrepreneur who's also from the West, right? Because this is someone someone who can speak the same type of lingo and language with someone who can relate to you. So it's easier to fall in that kind of category, right? But that's now create some form of bubble where you're just a community of you who are from certain place but do not have local context. So that has been really challenging, and local entrepreneurs can actually help that. Supporting more local entrepreneurs is going to be very much key. You need to work with people who have been on the ground, people who have solutions that are actually tangible and can help local population. Someone who has actually tried this, right? And that goes in two different ways. Encouraging funds to have some form of diversity within their team. Also, some form of mandate around supporting the local scene is always very important. So it goes both ways, right?
Yeah,
Recruit locally, but also invest locally.
absolutely. That makes sense. So let's say right now, okay, we're having this conversation, and I'm like, Flaw, I
Mm,
think let's open an accelerator or something. Let's bring one because we have, I don't know, the people with the domain and knowledge in this, and that, and maybe we can
mm,
really support here the growth. How long it
mm.
would take to open an accelerator? Let's say in Nairobi. So I can
Nairobi will be
start getting
faster.
my training my patients. Okay.
In Nairobi, it could be actually faster, but in other places, it could be longer. But I would say there are quite a number of accelerators here that are opening
I
up.
know, I've noticed that.
So yeah, it's
So
it's
that's
very
where they're
interesting
still
and
opening
helpful.
up. That's where they're still opening up, right?
Yeah, yeah. But there's also a debate around the value addition that some of these
Uh-huh.
are bringing to the table, because some of them are not run by former entrepreneurs or former investors, so they might not have
Okay.
hands-on type of experience. Yeah, and the government has been quite lenient right now, just trying to let everyone do their own thing, which is helpful, especially at the early
Mm.
stage. But I think as an entrepreneur, need to be very key and try to see what's the value addition they're bringing, right? Other than the
Yes,
money,
of course.
what else are they bringing? It's easy when you're an entrepreneur just to think about, hey, and money, I need money to start my business, to grow, and just, be going from incubator to incubator. But you just need to think about also the value addition because you're giving them a stake in your business. So yeah,
Hmm.
also that's very key.
So, okay, we're talking about 3 to 6 months or 1 year. I'm still curious about
Uh,
this time span.
no, let's do 1 month. 1 month in Nairobi, you have,
1 month. Oh, so
I
it's not
think.
that bad. Come on, like it's okay. I mean,
Oh, this is great. Even in Rwanda, actually, I think you can even do it
yeah.
in a shorter period of time.
Oh, Rwanda seems like really optimized, but it's a very small country, so it's easier to run process through, right?
Exactly.
All right, and that's exciting. I think I'm really like looking forward to see where the whole content is going and how the startup ecosystem will be forming on a
Mhm.
continuous basis. Especially you had those events popping up a lot, right? You mentioned one in January was happening that covers the whole overview of the ecosystem and so on. But going back to the topic, why this podcast do exist and why we are here. So I'm always very curious about the underdog founders, right? So from where they get their resilience, what really makes them different and makes them just, no matter the circumstances, to build things and kind of, yeah, do things and pursue the why. For me, like even looking into you, you are this underdog who's going outside the systemic approach, finding non-conventional ways to do things and be part of entrepreneurial journey. So how do you define an underdog founder in the context of African entrepreneurship?
I would say most entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs who didn't want to be entrepreneurs but are solving a challenge because they faced it, right? Um,
Hmm.
one one example that comes into mind is one entrepreneur I was talking to, and he told me how his father was always struggling with a real challenge in his farming, and it was very frustrating for him because he saw how much it put a financial burden to the family, and how much he had to step
Yeah.
into it. And he started looking around and saw that it's not just him; it's actually the whole in his village, in his where he's from. It's many people are struggling with such things, especially around supply. As I was talking about food waste, a lot of the production is wasted. So you come up with a solution around that,
Hmm.
a model to help connect the urban areas to the rural areas, right? So it's always around a
Hmm.
challenge that you have faced that really pushes you to start something else. And then another thing, where to get the resilience, where most entrepreneurs get the resilience is really sometimes you don't have a choice, I'll say.
Hmm.
Most people might not have access to good education. Most people might not have access to good networks. So it's really up to you to build something up from the ground, right? It comes from a point of necessity.
Yeah.
Uh, a lot of entrepreneurs, I'll say, even the micro, small entrepreneurs, comes from a point of necessity, right? You don't have any other option. What do? You start a business, and from there start
Hmm.
growing and see, hey, this is actually something that is viable. The most successful story from Burundi is one of the main supplier of clothing in Burundi actually dropped out of school very early
Hmm.
age and could not write for the longest time, but started a business because he saw the need for clothing, and now he's one of the main providers of that in the whole country,
Wow.
one of the main suppliers, right? Without education, without anything really. But as you grow, you start, being more resilient and seeing opportunity and actually building something that is long term.
That's so interesting. I can really hear what you were saying about this kind of people from the circumstances. They just find the problem that has to be solved to make lives easier. And I think that's what we're missing in Europe right now because
Hmm.
I don't know, it just everyone just wants to be an entrepreneur, it feels, even if there are different or a founder to create a VC backed venture and just to build something because it became cool rather than actually trying to understand the problems, to solve the problems. And I'm not saying that there are no great founders. There are incredible founders changing the world, changing European landscape, helping also other continents to solve specific problems from climate tech to health. But I also noticed the trend that it became more like kind of um, cool to build a startup rather than really having that one problem I want to solve and being fully obsessed about that and just going all in because that will change the world. So thanks for sharing that. So that's why I'm very interested always to look into other continents where they just into this kind of hungry entrepreneurial part because they know that that's the way to change the environment. Talking about founders a bit, maybe you can share what are the characteristics of founders in Africa, because from what I know and what I experience in the culture itself, like it's a very family oriented culture. And if I'm correct, people really like value the relationship, trust, and some kind of inclusivity. It feels a lot about community. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would like to know how does that resonate or how does that present in the startup world?
Yeah, that's a really good question. But yeah, I would say it's very relational and communal kind of oriented type of community. So as an entrepreneur, you need to understand that the personal touch is very important, right? Serving your customer, ensuring that they get the customer service is not always measured in terms of you don't have an app that can rank it, but I think it's more valuable here than anywhere else, especially where the price point is really small, right? If I go to a small shop in this area, if there are two small shops and most of the time they provide the same type of services, same type of products, but it's not what how you differentiate yourself. It's really about type of relations, how you treat people, the customer service, and I think that's something that is actually not to give feedback to most entrepreneurs. It's something that we haven't actually truly understood that this is very key,
Hmm.
more key here than anywhere else. So yeah, that's one area. It's as yeah, you're truly right. You have to be very much relational and oriented towards customer service. Another area I will say you have to be very much adaptable. Things change quite fast. So you have the
Hmm.
political instabilities that can happen, elections can happen, um, new laws and regulation. And I think things might change here faster than anywhere else. New competition, new technologies, especially with African countries opening themselves up to other countries and other continents, you find that there is a lot coming in, right? So you need to be very much adaptable and ensure that
Hmm.
whichever solution you come with, first of all, still fits the market. And if it doesn't, you have to change and learn, right? From other markets. I feel like it's a very young continent, as I mentioned. So there's a lot of opportunities and there's a lot coming. So ensure that with that whole change and that whole growth, you are still part of the game. You're still always changing. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
lastly, you have to have a really strong team. I think you need to know how to choose your team. Most entrepreneurs, the funny thing, actually, I think it's across many countries. You might not have the technical expertise, but you actually know how to sell, uh, how to how to encourage more people to join you.
How to gather people around. It's a very, very strong skill.
So I
Yeah.
think that's very key in succeeding here.
It is extremely important, I think. But what about this whole right now education part in Africa? Because I mean, a lot of things also depends on education, right? In a way, is there a strong
Mhm.
governmental focus on that? I do believe that we can change the world through education, actually, where you get the knowledge, you get their stuff into the environment that is thriving, innovative, and so on. How does it look right now? Are there any changes? Is like government contributed to like kind of providing access? Is education accessible to everyone?
In most, I think there's been huge stride that has been made towards education for all, but there's still a huge market, still huge gap in the market, still huge for most people to reach
Yeah.
good education. So I'll say some of the startups that we are seeing right now are really helping to solve that, right? We've seen
That's
startup in
cool.
the most ed tech really helping businesses, people, remote areas especially,
Yeah.
access knowledge that otherwise could have not gotten to, right? We have seen startups that are trying to leverage education or materials or education resources from developed markets and actually bringing them on the continent, right? So that's very encouraging. But I say there's still a huge gap in the education space
Mm-hmm.
on the continent in most countries. Language has been a barrier in most places because first of all, there's local languages. There are also languages that are used as official. For instance, in Burundi, French is the official language, English is here.
Mm.
So that kind of also stops inter-country sharing of experience, right? It's really hard to move from one place to another with that type of limitation. But I'll say entrepreneurs are really working towards that. We are seeing a lot of, you asked me at the beginning which interesting areas we are seeing a lot of cool ideas happening in the education space, especially with I feel like
Yeah.
it's going to be very much interesting things. There's one company that is using AI to basically reach the Google, the people who cannot reach Google. So that's always interesting to see, really, and I really hope some of that innovation in the West can actually help here.
Cool. Do you have any leading startups, founders you're following in the continent that kind of everyone is looking into?
Yeah, there is. I want to bring one comes to mind. She's called Hilda. Really admire what she does. This is her second
Yeah.
startup. Exited her first startup. She's in the fintech space.
Mm-hmm.
I had the chance to work with her company in my previous job, and I really saw how well she's doing, and she's really leading the continent in that space.
And what
Yeah.
are they doing?
So it's a fintech that is providing financial solutions to the small SMEs, right? People
Mm.
cannot otherwise access banking type of services, and they are very much limited in their growth. So that's the kind of challenges they are solving. The
Okay.
missing middle, really. It's really interesting. An area where most financial institutions are not present, so actually having the real impact on the ground, right? We talked about impact and how most of these entrepreneurs
Yeah.
are driven by the impact and the drive to actually solve something and provide a solution for things that were not there before. So yeah, I think what she's doing is really good. She runs a company called Possession. Yeah,
Okay, possession.
for anyone listening to this,
Cool.
you should look it
You
up.
should check it out. All right.
Mm.
So I have a few more questions, getting closer to the end. So
Mhm.
your mission. So now you're with Bestseller Foundation. What's your mission for the whole ecosystem?
I was telling someone yesterday, I want to be the Robin of the Batman, and the Batman are basically entrepreneurs. So, and as
Uh-huh.
an investor, I see myself as a right hand man, someone who can
Okay.
help businesses. So that's really how I see myself, really helping guide the businesses, helping to solve some of the many challenges we talked about today, including
Mm-hmm.
internet, which hasn't been very
Mm-hmm.
helpful. Uh, so yeah, that's how I like to see, and eventually I will want to start. I see a lot of areas that are interesting. I want to start maybe a fund later on, just to be more focused on local entrepreneurship. So yeah, looking forward to the future.
Do you have any problems you want to solve yourself?
And the problems I want to solve is around mostly the food waste. Coming from Burundi, I know how critical that is. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
Second thing is around we need to regulate better how we are dealing with food, especially with the current population growth that we're about to see. We need to be more efficient. We need to produce more, produce in an efficient way. So I think this is going to be a key focus area of mine. That's
Mm-hmm.
something I'm always looking, very much interested to hear more about.
That is so cool. I like it.
Mhm.
And what about your music
Mm.
career? Do you play an instrument? I'm back to the same.
No, not yet. That's it. But I want to
All
be a
right.
producer. Imagine, I want to be a producer without
Okay.
playing an instrument. But I think I should start. I always liked the guitar. That's something maybe I should pick it up.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll check on you. I'll check on you. But that's so great. Anything else you would like to share, Flora, about this whole African scene and your role there, about the founders?
I'll say it's an exciting time to be here. It's a very
Uh-huh.
exciting time to be on the continent. Uh, so many innovative ideas happening, so many driven young people. And I can only say one thing, it's that the future is really bright. And to any entrepreneur out there who's still solving solutions, who's trying to solve solutions, stay strong. I know the journey is not an easy one.
Ah,
Things will get better, I hope, and I wish for you. And yeah, reach out. There's a strong community that is being built around that. So yeah,
that's
leverage
amazing.
a lot of friends. Yeah.
And one more thing before we fully
Mhm.
close this episode
Mhm.
about this whole African scene and a bit of your story. I always ask my guests to share one question for the audience so we can all ponder going through the day and to think about. Usually it's more about like life, philosophy, and so on. What would you like to leave as a question
I'll, s-
for people to
my
think?
question my question is, between society and technology, which one do you think changes faster or moves faster?
Wow. I'm dropping the mic. And that was Flo from Bestseller Foundation and his big smile, big heart, and always very
Hmm.
positive approach and very supportive. So thank you so much for joining and opening up the new chapter of this podcast episode series where I will try to bring more different perspectives on the startup scene so we can learn from each other, connect, and maybe build the relationship, not only in our bubbles. So thank you for
Thank you,
joining. It was
Sibile.
really great having you.
This
And
is
where do
great.
people
Thank
can
you very
follow?
much.
It is great to have you here. Where can people follow your journey?
I'm mostly on LinkedIn and Twitter. I
Okay.
think that's where I'm most active. So
You mean X
Florent
X?
Nduwayezu.
Okay.
Oh yes,
Oh, yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
Elon
I'll
Musk
put
going
all
to
the
be mad
links.
at me.
Awesome. I'll put all the links in the description of this episode. And yeah, hope to talk to you again soon. And everyone, we wish a great day. And thank you for listening. It was
Cheers, bye.
Perception Paradox. Bye.